Graeme Holdsworth. I'm now retired. I used to be an architect, but I discovered very early in my career the guy with the best job was the client. So I spent the whole of most of my professional career as a project manager of large-scale developments. I just happened to get into large-scale, and we're talking about seriously large-scale. Crown Casino was one, the Sydney GPO, Western Hotel, and headquarters for Macquarie Bank. And so my role was to employ architects rather than be one. So it was the construction process from concept to commissioning and sale of properties, so the whole works of it. And a lot of those jobs were very successful, and for some reason I got some of the credit for it. But towards the end of my career, things started to go a little differently. There are two management techniques in the construction industry. One is to be a bully and tell everyone they got it wrong and live with a threat of fear, and that's fairly common. The other is a collaborative approach where everyone gets together and solve problems, because there's always going to be them. Although we deal with standard pieces of equipment to put a building together, it's usually a prototype. It's a one-off. It's never been done like that before, so problems are going to arise. And if you identify them early and get involved, get everyone together, you can sort them out. The worst that can happen, take a bit longer, cost a bit more money, but the more you work together, the better that happens. And I found myself being the bully, going into meetings, yelling at people, calling people incompetent, telling them to go off and fix problems that they created, when in reality we all created them. I really knew I was in trouble when I started to become unreliable. I'd tell people I was at the office or on site or at the consultant's office. In reality, I was home struggling to get out of bed. I started to pick fights. And I went to my GP and he said, "You're not your usual cheeky self, what's wrong?" I told him how I was feeling the first time I'd opened up to anyone about it, although I guess others knew because they knew there was a change in my attitude. Then I started psychiatric help. I was institutionalised a couple of times, and then my project started to wonder where I was for the 2 or 3 weeks that I was institutionalised. Ultimately, my behaviour was so bizarre, and I picked a fight with a client who was a client from hell, but I should have done it better, and I was removed from a project. So basically I was sacked. Finding more work in that area wasn't easy, partly because of my age, partly because there's only a small group of people worked at that level, and they all knew I'd been removed from a project. But the reality was I'd lost my willingness or want to work again, so I didn't apply. People offered, I didn't get back to them. That caused tensions at home. I lived in a house that really didn't understand my situation as being seriously ill. More pull your socks up, get on with life, what's wrong with you? You've always been a get up and a go-getter, get back there. And that caused some real tensions. My behaviour became more bizarre. The more bizarre it became, the less we talked about it. Ultimately, the marriage fell apart, separation and divorce. Both of those events were triggers for the first time in this reasonably long history of severe depression. So I started to feel suicidal. I didn't tell anyone, and I should have. I withdrew and withdrew and withdrew. Finally, I made the attempt. Luckily, I was saved. From then I was back into the mental health process, but I was a bit lucky. I had a few bob and had good health insurance, so I went through the private system, and the private system gave me everything I wanted when I wanted it. And ultimately, through a struggle, through different drugs, ECT treatment, lots of different therapies, I fell upon acceptance and commitment therapy. Fell in love with it. The light bulb went on. This was the answer to my problems. I was fortunate to have almost a year and a half of group therapy, going to conferences, getting to be on first name terms with Russ Harris, who was the producer of The Happiness Trap and so forth. So it became important part to me. Lots of patience, lots of practice. Recovery started to come, and I've been on that recovery trail ever since. At the end of that, rather than try and go back to my old profession, I thought I'd use the experience that I had in mental health and suicide to give something back, because that's part of the value base of acceptance commitment therapy. And I've been involved in suicide prevention now for close on 8 years, I guess, originally as a speaker for Beyond Blue, helping Movember with some of their advertising campaigns, and now serious involvement with both you at Roses in the Ocean and Suicide Prevention Australia. Black Dog, I do a lot of work for, and I'm also on a fantastic committee at Lifeline. So I have a busy life in suicide prevention. I think there's probably two key areas. One is loneliness. Now, loneliness can be self-imposed in a sense. As I said before, the sense of withdrawal, the anxiety of being involved with people when you're suffering, and out of that you can actually create your own loneliness. People will ring and say, "Get involved in this." You knock them back. They ring a second time, you knock them back. Ring a third time, you knock them back again. They don't ring a fourth time. So you create your own sense of loneliness. You withdraw from the people that you usually connect with, the organisations you used to be involved with, and especially when you have the problem of the feeling of being stigmatised going back there. You walk into a room of the old footy club, or in my case, of the professional groupings I used to be in, and you get this sense that everyone's sort of staring, going, "There's that bloke that fell off the end of the twig." So there's some comfort in not being involved. And within that sense of loneliness, there's an even worse situation, and that's the situation of feeling alone. And that's about feelings. You feel like you're the only person in the world that feels like you feel, that went through the same suffering as you feel. So you can be within a group of people and still feeling this sense of alone. Whereas I'm the only person, and that's where the work that both Roses in the Ocean do, and also becoming more prevalent now in suicide prevention, of peer groups, where you can finally meet your tribe. You can discover that you don't feel alone, that you aren't alone, that there are other people that feel like you. We all get there in a different way. No one takes exactly the same road. It's very complicated. Circumstances are always different, but we take the same journey. So we don't have to say, "I know how you feel," I know, because you don't. But you know the feeling, which is different than how people feel. And therefore you can be a good ear, you can be a good listener. So I think there are important distinctions between feeling alone and feeling lonely. That was my second point, was one of having a sense of purpose. A lot of people, especially if they have strong careers, but even people who have trades and so forth, they're known for what they do. And there's a sense of belonging and being able to be a provider, having career, and it's therefore you are Joe Blow the plumber or Joe Blow the architect in my case. And that's very important. That is your identity, and a lot of your connections relate to work, more so than you'd ever believe. Your social contacts, your mates are your workmates and so forth. So when you reach retirement, they disappear. They continue to do the work that they do, but you're no longer part of that work. So all of a sudden, you're left without a purpose of doing it. You also reach the point where you don't earn a regular income. You either rely on your superannuation or government pension or whatever it is. So the idea of regular income and being able to budget, do whatever, the problem with superannuation is you don't know how long you're going to be around for, so you don't know how long you've got to spend it. So there's a change in lifestyle. A lot of things you used to do, you don't do anymore. So that's another step of withdrawal, lack of purpose and so forth. You also have most of these people end up being empty nesters. The kids have grown up, they've left home, you've got grandchildren and so forth. So now the two things that were important to a lot of people, employment, role, purpose in a job, children, role, purpose in growing them up, have all vanished. And you're now left with a feeling a burden. If you try and impose yourself on your family even. It's their life, why am I imposing myself? So a burden, a sense of lack of purpose, of not having a role, and that builds and builds and builds, and we start that downward spiral into uselessness, hopeless, unwanted, and that can be the disease of old age. in my own experience, initially, they wouldn't have. We get very good at covering up. We get good at pretending, of telling lies to cover it. They would have realised that there was something wrong with me because there was this changed attitude and approach. But as soon as that became aware, I wasn't around anymore. My suicidal thoughts started with two triggers. I'd been in the mental health process for quite a while, a number of years. One was when I was removed from a major project because I got the politics wrong. My attitude was different. In the old days, I would have been easy to fix this problem. It was with a client from hell, but instead I bowled in like a bull in a china shop, and I was removed from a project, probably rightfully so. That really traumatised me. I'd never been sacked before. I took it as a new experience, but in reality it gutted me. And then the problems of my home life, the too much alcohol, being too remote, bizarre behaviour, the marriage broke down and we had separation and then divorce. Both of those major events, after both of them, I started to contemplate suicide for the first time ever in my mental health trip. And I didn't tell anyone. I should have. Most people didn't pick it. I think I shocked the world when I had the attempt and was saved. They came out of the woodwork saying, "We didn't know. Why didn't you tell us? We're here to help." So all of those sorts of things. They need to listen. That's the key part to it. Having had my experience, I discovered a lot of people ring me up and say, my son, my brother, my friend and so forth is suicidal. Would you like to talk to them? And I always say, yeah, I'm happy to. I'm not the solution. I'm not going to solve their problem, but I'm happy to talk to them. And part of that talking process is really listening. And it is that point that we all get to there by taking a different route, different roads, different approaches. It is complex, but we've all been down the same journey. So there's little point in saying I know how you feel, because I don't. They're feeling different. But if I say I know the feeling, then I can hit the point because we have been on the same journey. And so that's a helpful process. So if I was there, I would wish that people would listen to me, that I would connect with people that understand, have been on the journey, and know that telling me like they did in the old days, pull your socks up, get on with life, what's wrong with you, you weak bugger, you've always been strong, you were always highly up there, motivated and so forth. I hope those sorts of comments and attitudes have gone. But at least I'm well enough now to tell them to shut up. Sense of community is important. So get them involved in community, even if they get them into certain groupings. Some terrific ones for men, because that's the area I work in, is things like Men's Shed, where after retirements they go to Men's Shed and they also learn new skills. There's a bank of computers there and they teach them how to use the computer, because that's now how they will navigate the world if they're on pensions, dealing with governments and so forth. They also can talk about their life to people who have similar lives. And with the involvement of speakers and so forth within these groups, they can be encouraged to talk about their mental health. I've given a lot of talks to Men's Sheds, and they can open up very quickly. Once you start telling your story, heads are nodding in the crowd, people are putting up their hands saying, oh yeah, no one knows, but I've been on such and such a medication. And the other guy in the other corner will go, oh yeah, I had those, but they were no good at all. And you discover that half the room had been down the process but never talked to each other about it. So you allow them to open up, you allow the discussion, you encourage discussion about mental health, and it really does. Then people will put the effort in. They'll look after each other. Also within those, if you're in, which I'm not, but I have some friends, and my mother went through aged care process, to rather than have them sit in a room and do other stuff, to encourage them to sit and reminisce very important part of the process is being able to tell your stories, that your life was purposeful, that there were things you did, that there were family you brought up, there were people that you helped and assisted along the way. And that can start a very lively conversation. That conversation can bring people out of themselves and give them back a sense of purpose. A terrific experience was a television show about introducing young children to old people. I can't remember the name of it. But the change you saw in the older people about being able to be children again was just sensational. So there are a number of things like that. But to encourage people to talk to each other, to tell their stories, stories are very important. Oh, the most important part of all of that is services have to reach out rather than waiting for people to come to them. There's all these statistics, only 60% of people who suicided ever had any contact with mental health. Well, it's not their fault, it's mental health's fault for not reaching out to them, for not being available to them, for being too clinically based, being too technical for them. Movember have some terrific talks about it's not that men don't reach out for help. When they get there, it's no help and they turn away and never come back. And I think that's the biggest problem. People make the effort, get turned off by it, and as much as you try and tell them to go back there, they say, no, I've been there once. I felt embarrassed by the process. No one was helpful. I felt like a number, not a person. There's no compassion in the approach. You've lost them and you've lost them forever. So that's the important part, is to reach out. There's some good examples of that. Sons of the West, which is run by the Western Bulldogs AFL football team, have a process where they reach out to vulnerable people in the western suburbs of Victoria. And they do so by connecting with the love of football. And they offer them, if you join our program, you'll get some memorabilia, and if you really get involved, you'll get invited to games, and if you really come back and be part of the whole process, you'll get to meet players and so forth. That's reaching out. Those guys then tell their mates, come along, it's fantastic, this would happen. So it's a self-fulfilling, self-promoting process, and it's continual reach out after reach out after reach out. And it's now huge. It's really scalable. It goes to the western regions of Victoria rather than just the western suburbs. And I don't understand why there's not more of that. I don't understand why every football and rugby league club in Australia don't have a similar program. Just think how much connection you would get from it.